Thank you to these sponsors of the Before I Die New Mexico Virtual Festival in 2020. A Good Goodbye, Gail Rubin puts the fun in funeral planning. After, a new way to stay connected with your loved ones in the cemetery anytime and anywhere. Aquamationinfo.com, where you can learn about alkaline hydrolysis, an eco-friendly alternative to flame cremation. Compassion and Choices, offering care and choice at the end of life. Daniel's Family Funerals and Cremations and Gabaldon Mortuary in Albuquerque. Fairview Memorial Park and Vista Verde Memorial Park in Albuquerque and Rio Rancho. Avista Cremation and Burial in Santa Fe. DeVargas Funeral Home and Crematory in Espanola and in Taos. Estate Pros, which offers personal dispersal of possessions due to a move, illness, or death. French Funerals and Cremations and Sunset Memorial Park in Albuquerque. And Keeper, which helps you keep memories alive with online tributes to preserve, celebrate, and share life legacies.
Death is full of surprises, huh?
You have no idea.
Yes, welcome. Good morning. I am Gail Rubin, the doyen of death and coordinator of the Before I Die New Mexico Festival. It's day 4 of the festival, and wow, we have got an incredible lineup for you, and so excited to have with us Nancy Mance from the Office of the Medical Investigator. Now, in past years, when we were able to go out in person, we were able to go and actually visit a very controlled tour of the offices there, but not this year, because here we are on Zoom. But we are able to bring you some video. But first I want to say hi to Nancy. And hello. So how did you come to work at the Office of the Medical Investigator, and what do you do there?
Well, I am the Grief Services Program Manager. I started working at OMI in 2011, and I am a independently licensed therapist in the state of New Mexico. Before coming to OMI, I worked with victims of crime who were dealing with a level of trauma. And when I came to OMI, my thought was that I imagine the families dealing with the deaths that occur that are investigated by OMI also have trauma, and that does turn out to be the case, that trauma with grief. And so I provide mental health support, emotional support to families dealing with sudden death.
And you're actually pretty unique in the country. There aren't very many OMI or coroner's offices that offer this service.
Yes, I think that's true. There's few, less than 10 certainly. And I think that I think OMI is an ideal place for there to be a grief services support program. Unfortunately, I think most people don't recognize the nature of the complications that occur with violent, sudden death. But really, there's a risk for post-traumatic stress. And this is the first and best place to begin addressing that. I think it's a poorly understood facet dealing with sudden death.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a video that was put together by when the OMI new building first opened.
Public tours of the New Mexico office of the Medical Investigator's new state-of-the-art headquarters aren't all that unheard of. It is, after all, one of the most technologically advanced facilities of its kind in the country.
Not the world, and so we're really delighted to show it off.
But on this evening, the show proceeded with an unusual twist.
She's got some defensive wounds on her hands. She's got some hair on her hands, and we want to preserve that evidence. So we always bag their hands.
As guests got a glimpse of pathologists and other OMI staffers in their real workday roles.
Because we perform approximately 2,100 autopsies a year, we have an entire team devoted to take care of our patients.
We have 3 suspects, usually their upper teeth.
OMI Operations Director Amy Bewley calls this open house CSI OMI, a look at medical legal death investigation in the New Mexico office of the Medical Investigator.
We thought with so many people always assuming that we have everything that's available on TV and can do everything in 47 minutes, we thought that showing it off this way would give a little bit more of a perspective on what actually happens here.
Look, footprints, shoes. What we've got.
So in an OMI courtyard, field investigators staged a grisly homicide scene.
The lady and her friends lured her to a park where they stabbed her and beat her. Here is the carnage that we've created for you.
Approximately 3 stab wounds.
Showing their guests how they go about collecting evidence. In OMI's expansive autopsy room, Dr. Michelle Aurelius and her team explain the clues they look for in determining a cause of death.
And right away on this preliminary image, you can see there's something that doesn't belong.
3D reconstructions, dental investigation, and anthropological work.
You could tell this has been broken at some point.
Were all
and
on
not
display.
mended properly.
It's a very fascinating building to see all on its own, but we thought we'd try to not make a bad pun, but bring this building to life for this event.
The open house is part of Lobo Living Room, a series of events sponsored by the UNM Alumni Association intended to showcase UNM alumni and their work at some of the university's most interesting places and programs. UNM alumnus Bewley says OMI's important and unique mission, along with its state-of-the-art facilities, made it a perfect fit for the series.
So we thought that it would be interesting for people to see an organization that has a statewide mission and to show a facility that is unequaled in the United States.
Fascinating look at what you do there. So the OMI gets involved when there's been an unattended death or any of the sides, homicides, suicides, accidental deaths.
Some cases of natural death, and then mysterious circumstance, or where it is not clear what has happened. And we are a legislated body. We were brought into being by the state legislature in the early 70s. And so we're required to investigate death in certain circumstances.
Do you know, was it a coroner system before then?
You know, I'm not quite sure. There's been an evolution in terms of death investigation. And originally, of course, everybody had a coroner system, which is basically someone that has graduated from high school and is 18 years or older, and they are appointed, I believe, to be the coroner for the county.
You didn't really have a pathology or a doctorate or anything like that, you just know somebody.
Right. But that has evolved over time to the state that we now find medical forensic death investigations are highly perfected.
By the way, for our other participants on this webinar, if you have questions, you can either unmute and ask your question, although raise your hand so I can see you on the screen and turn your video on if you're going to pose your question verbally live, or if you want to type it into the chat, I will pose your question to Nancy for you. And by the way, we are recording this, so if you're in the witness protection program and you don't want to be spotted online, because we will put this online later, you may want to turn off your camera, change your name, and but by being on this webinar, you're agreeing to the videotaping. So what would happen if someone woke up one morning and their spouse was dead in bed next to them?
So they would contact law enforcement. They would call someone to get assistance, and at some point law enforcement would be contacted. And
would it be a 911 call, or, you know, if it was an old person, maybe the non-emergency line?
Typically it is a 911 call. If you can imagine being in bed with your loved one, with your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend, and you wake up and, you know, you push them and ask, I'm going to go get the coffee on, and they don't move. It is an incredibly shocking moment. And it's not always recognized that the person next to you is deceased. They might not be deceased. They might be in last moments to dying. And so most people do call 911, emergency comes out, as well as law enforcement. And at the point that it is determined that that is someone who has died, then the medical investigator is called out to do a scene investigation, which is to determine anything necessary to know to help us at the OMI determine the cause and manner of this person's death.
I personally know of two instances where a man who was older and had had a lot of heart issues laid down and take a nap, and he died while taking a nap. Not a bad way to go, but in fact, they took his body to the OMI because it was an unattended death.
Right.
Similarly, there was a gentleman who was very much a back to the land guy who lived in the East Mountains, and he died in his sleep. And his son had to reclaim his dad's body from the OMI. They wanted to do a home funeral, green burial there on his property. So they did. And if somebody did want to do that, where they, like with this gentleman, he dies in his sleep, his body winds up at the OMI, but they want to do a home funeral, what do they have to do to get that body back?
The family has to request a permit for a home burial in the same way that funeral homes have to request a permit. And my best recommendation would be for the family, of course, to contact OMI and tell us, we would like to do a home burial. What do we need to do? And you would receive specific instruction about how to end up being able to do that. Native American families are the one culture, the one group of folks that actually do not have to seek a cremation or a burial permit. They, by cultural rights, they can retrieve the body of their loved one. And often they do exactly that. They come with their vehicle and some family members to retrieve their loved one.
I noticed in the video when they were showing people working in the lab and explaining what they do, there was a woman with what we've come to know as PPE. She had a face shield and the mask and the gloves. Can you talk a bit about what goes on in the lab part of OMI?
You know, I know you had mentioned before we started this morning about wondering about COVID-19 and how that has impacted our operations. And in fact, multiple things have happened as a result of COVID-19. First of all, OMI is on remote operations. Some of the classes of workers, grief services, for instance, we're working often from home. Additionally, we have we take much greater care to try to identify in the field before we send our investigator out, is there a possibility that this is a COVID-19 related death? All of our scene investigators are wearing PPE, which is not something that would have been typical previously. Additionally, we are taking extra precautions in our autopsy suite to protect all of our pathologists and the surgical support, the morphology team, from any kind of infection. If the decedent is known to have tested positive for COVID-19, then we are very careful about whether we need to bring that body to OMI for investigation, or whether that's not necessary and a field investigation and examination will be sufficient.
So in this era of COVID, you
Mhm.
still have people dying in car accidents and committing or dying by suicide. Gotta train myself not to say committed. And and there's still homicides. People are getting shot, and people are found dead out on the streets and whatnot. So how has, even with you working remotely with your grief services, what is happening in the labs itself during this day and age?
So everything is continuing. We actually have exceeded capacity of our cooling units within the building, and we have had to set up multiple refrigerated vehicles, trucks, appropriate structures to keep cool and take care of all of the decedents we have. And at last that I heard, we had 74 bodies that we were storing in those areas, because all of the internal storage are at capacity.
What is the capacity for the internal storage?
I want to say it is in the neighborhood of 175 or so.
Okay.
Um,
how long does a body usually stay there before? Do you have unclaimed bodies?
We do. So when we receive a body, it is typical that this person was identified as deceased within the last 24 hours. And then if necessary, they're brought into OMI here in Albuquerque from across the entire state. Typically, the autopsy examination process, the procedure itself, takes place that very morning and is generally done by noon. The doctor has finished the examination, whether it be external only or internal and external. And if we have identified the next of kin and the person is clearly and cleanly identified, we are able to release that person's body by the end of the day in most cases. So as you can imagine, sometimes identification does not happen quite that quickly, or we don't identify next of kin that quickly. But as soon as we have those two items in place, we are seeking to release the body to the family as quickly as possible. When a body goes unclaimed, each county of the state has a thing called indigent burial program, and it is typically a county, part of county government. And at the point that we determine the body will not be claimed, that's after 14 days or longer. If we know a family is trying to claim a body and having financial issues, we try to do everything we can to work with the family. But at some point, an unclaimed body will go to indigent burial in the county the body was found in for disposition by the county. And that would typically be a cremation. Some counties turn cremains over to family, and other counties retain cremains until the family is able to afford to pay for the cremation fee.
CSI, crime scene investigation TV shows are incredibly popular. And I'm sure people have ideas about, well, like they said in the video, you can get it done in 45 minutes and solve the crime.
Right.
But that's not real life.
No, not, and I think one of the biggest myths that shows perpetuate is that an OMI, a medical investigator's office, can determine exact moment of death. And in fact, that's not true. Oftentimes the family has a better idea of when this person died just based on communication, based on texting and telephone calls, or, well, I last saw him at 2 a.m. eating chips in the kitchen, and then at 6, he wasn't alive anymore. Because of the varying states of health that we all carry, the varying climate conditions, the environment changes, and so on, there's no way to actually pinpoint the moment of death.
And what happens in an autopsy is they'll examine the chest and the organs in the torso, that famous Y-shaped incision on the body, and then they'll also cut off the top of the head and see what's going on in the brain area, if I remember correctly from previous tours.
So there are various levels of examination. As I had said earlier, sometimes an examination can be conducted in the field and the body doesn't need to come to us because it's quite clear that this person died in a motor vehicle accident. And so we may not need to bring them to us. We can take tissue samples. But when we do receive a body, depending on the condition of the body, the doctor may do an external examination only, or may do a full external and internal examination. The head does not always have to be examined unless there is some reason to suspect. And the Y incision opens the chest cavity so that it's available for investigation by the doctor. The head is typically, the scalp is cut and then retracted so that the skull cap and the brain become available for examination when that is indicated.
But it's not always. Like that gentleman who I mentioned had heart issues and died in his sleep. Basically, all OMI did was review the paperwork indicating that he had health issues and said, yeah, that's probably what did him in.
Yes. Sometimes a review of the hospitalizations and the medical documentation is sufficient for the doctor to conclude what the likely manner of death is. The mistake that people make, or what's not well understood, is an internal examination does not always reveal exactly what killed a person.
So to all of our participants here, if you have other questions, please type them in the chat and I will read them to Nancy. So Nancy, please tell me about the program that you head up for helping the families.
Thank you. We have a grief service program at OMI, and the families that we serve are families dealing with homicide, suicide, accidental overdose, motor vehicle accident, and we also are interested in doing outreach to families with COVID-19 losses. So what's in common amongst all of these manners of death are that they are public risk, public safety, public health issues that we try to provide support to the families for. And particularly when it comes to homicide and suicide, the manner of death, which is often violent and completely unexpected, just leaves the family open for such a difficult course of grief. And then also post-traumatic stress symptoms, you know, imagining what that was like when your loved one was confronted with a gun, or imagining the depth of despair that your loved one was in at the point that they took their own life. And so the families are left with a lot of unanswered questions, and our role is to provide them with support. We do that through face-to-face meetings. Right now, of course, Zoom and telehealth are where it's at. We also meet with families on the telephone. When we are in full operation, we have offices that we meet with folks. We also facilitate support groups. And we have contractors, about 22 contractors around the state that are trained by us at Grief Services to provide this kind of complicated grief support to families throughout the state.
And excuse me, how many families do you serve in a year on average?
So we, last year, if I'm not mistaken, we served 634 individuals or cases. And sometimes we will have one case that has multiple family members in need of support. So, you know, they say that up to 5 to 10 grieving individuals are left behind by every homicide that occurs. And of course, everybody doesn't want grief support. They don't want emotional support, but we're here to offer it if they do want that.
Do you think we'll ever get back to being able to physically tour the OMI offices?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I'm going to say it is not looking good for
next couple of months. Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
So part of the issue for us at OMI is we cannot afford to have an outbreak in this organization, because if your pathologists go down, there is no one. Mm-hmm. It's an essential service that we provide to our state, and so we're very protective right now of keeping everyone safe.
Well, that's good. We do have a question in the chat from Holly. She's asking, how do you actively offer grief support? Like, what kinds of activities or services does that entail?
So when we come to work every morning, we have a thing called the docket, and it is the list of families or the list of decedents from across the state. And in reviewing the docket, we are able to identify those cases that fall within our service area. And we call people, we send letters to let people know that we have services. And then when they contact us, number one, first and foremost, we provide them with emotional support. We help them access and understand better all of the roles of the OMI, how to obtain the death certificate, how to obtain the autopsy report, setting up a meeting with the doctor, applying for Victims of Crime Act funds, any kind of advocacy that we can assist a family with. And then beyond all of that, we offer to sit with families and just provide emotional support. Of course, we can't fix anything. The worst thing has happened. All we can do is be here to be a listening ear, to be a companion in some very sad and difficult times. So I saw you raise your eyebrows. Victims of Crime Act.
That was my next question, yes.
The Victims of Crime Act is a federal pot of money that is collected from the perpetrators of crime around the country. And it is pooled, and it's collected in the courts, but it's pooled federally and then redispersed to each state. Victims of Crime Act provides reimbursement for out-of-pocket expenses that families have to deal with when there has been a victimization. And so, of course, we're the OMI, we're death, we deal with death. And so our victims are typically homicide victims, families dealing with the homicide of someone they love, or motor vehicle accidents where there are charges such as DUI, DWI, motor vehicle accidents, hit and runs where someone has died, that kind of thing. And so we help our families turn in an application to access those reimbursement funds. It will help pay for funeral expenses. It can help pay for emotional support expenses, counseling. It can help pay for crime scene cleanup. It can help pay for transportation to court-related events. There's just a whole lot of different things that fund can help assist a family with.
Well, that's awesome. I had no idea that existed.
Yeah, yes.
And Holly says, that's huge. Thanks for all the work you do there. There should be more places like this. Well, I guess everybody has their version of the OMI, but not the grief services that you offer.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, Toddy asks, on the tours, should we ever get back to seeing them, does one actually see dead bodies?
No. No dead bodies. And so the bodies that you were seeing in that little film were all actors. And because of confidentiality restrictions, we do not put anyone on display like that. And we also don't have public autopsy viewing. I guess they did at one time, longer, something that we do.
Mm-hmm. And actually the tours that I got to go on 2 years ago and the year before, when they took us around, we got a peek into the refrigeration unit. So you saw bodies in body bags, but
in body bags.
Yeah, but that not out in the open.
Yeah. Yes.
What else would you like people to know about the OMI that we might not have touched on already?
I want people to realize that the people that work at the OMI are a pretty committed bunch of folks, and they have as a very high priority taking care of the decedents that we are in charge of examining, honoring the bodies that we receive, doing the best job that we can to determine what happened. Why did this person die? Because we really want to provide that service to the family so that they have that closure around what happened. We are intent on doing the best that we can to take care of families that have to interact with us. And, you know, sometimes having to interact with OMI is just tough. Nothing is pleasant about the reason that you came to OMI. So it can be very difficult interactions, but we really want to serve the public.
And is there a connection with the University of New Mexico Medical School and the OMI?
Yes. So what's interesting, when we were brought into being in 1973, the state legislature chose to house the OMI under the School of Medicine at the University of New Mexico. And so we have a large role as a teaching institution, in addition to death investigation and research.
So some medical students might be serving some time in the OMI as part of their education. Serving time.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, in fact, medical students on their rotations come through all the time. We currently have 2 residents in study. We currently have 4 fellows who are working on their final year of specialization in forensic pathology. And then we have 6 pathologists who are all faculty members at the university. And I think I heard a figure recently that OMI, this program, has produced about 25% of the working forensic pathologists in the nation.
Wow, that's awesome.
We are a preeminent program.
That is great.
Yeah.
And I do have one more question from the chat. Janet asked,
Okay.
A few years ago, I was involved with a family that had to wait a long time for a death certificate because the person had died at UNM hospital. We were told that OMI had to provide the death certificate, ? And I know OMI gets involved with, well, burial transit permits, but also death certificates, I guess.
Yes, well, we are considered the university morgue, the university hospital morgue. And so we're involved in all of the death certificates for the university hospital, as well as the death certificates for anyone that we have done a death investigation on. There are only 3 entities capable of producing a pronouncement of death, and that would be a doctor in a hospital setting. It would be the Office of the Medical Investigator, and it would be hospice. And so when UNM Hospital pronounces death, we are responsible for producing that death certificate.
Okay. Kudos to the Office of the Medical Investigator and to your grief support program. You're doing amazing things, and I really appreciate you taking the time to help illuminate what goes on there at the Office of the Medical Investigator.
Yes, I appreciate you having me, Gail. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So everybody, our next event will be a book discussion about managing our loved ones' personal possessions before and after they die. We have a great panel of folks who have written books about managing your possessions or your loved ones' possessions. So take a quick break, run to the bathroom, and we'll join up with you at the top of the hour.